Hello listeners, Jordan here. I just want to let you know that you can listen to Nighttime early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime.
You are tuned to the Nighttime Podcast, focused on the fringe of Canada.
Hello listeners, and welcome back to my coverage of the Peterborough Police Siege of August 13th, 2022. In this episode, we're going to continue to explore one of the more bizarre moments in my recent memory. In our last episode, I used audio clips of those directly involved to present a basic narrative of what happened and how. But tonight, I'm going to do it a little bit different. Caryma S'ad is an Ontario-based lawyer, journalist, and activist. When she heard the self-declared Queen of Canada was planning a siege of a police station, she did what any reasonable lawyer, journalist, activist would do. She grabbed her helmet, hopped on an electric scooter, and got right into the middle of it. She was one of the first people on the scene that day, and she left only when the Queen's RV did. In fact, Caryma all but chased them out of there. And in this episode, she's going to tell us all about it. So let's get to it. In this episode of Nighttime, I'll be joined by Caryma S'ad, who will share her experiences with Romana DIdulo and the Peterborough Police Siege. So let's just start with a basic introduction, Caryma. So who are you?
Well, I'm a lawyer, and I've taken an interest in documenting events and political rallies, things of that nature, specifically focusing on the so-called freedom movement, but what really I think is the spread of right-wing populism.
All right. And this interest in kind of these groups and, extremist type groups that you're documenting and researching on your own, is this related to your job as a lawyer? Does it fit in any way, or is it just a personal interest?
It's primarily a personal interest. Part of what drew me to this is the prevalence of legal misinformation. So whether it's in terms of understanding the Charter versus the Bill of Rights or sovereign citizenship, things that misconstrue how our system works, and people seem to rely on to their detriment, and kind of understanding, who is spreading this and to what end and why are people buying into it. And then the more that I attended these rallies, it became clear that there were themes of anti-government, anti-establishment, anti-rule of law, things that, were racist in nature. And it's a weird coinciding of interests. And I've always been fascinated by cults. So all of this I find it very compelling. And I also think that, especially at the outset, the media coverage wasn't adequate or satisfactory. And in part because of the way that these groups or protesters reacted to media. So I was able to find a way to get in there and just document and capture what's my perspective, one person's perspective, but I think of value, like in a historical sense, and to let others know what's happening.
And you talked about kind of the way a lot of these groups and the protests and events they hold, how they treat media. Like a CBC reporter generally isn't going to be welcome to go in there and just kind of hang out as this stuff is happening. But in watching, the videos you post on Twitter, you're right in there in the thick of it. Is this like, are you not scared, jumping in as a lawyer, and probably someone they just naturally don't trust for that reason, as a lawyer and as an outsider?
I mean, and as a brown person, there's a lot of reasons why I probably don't belong, and a woman. Although, no, I'd say that the sort of the gender parity is not fully equal, but there's a lot of women. And in Toronto, to be fair, it's not an entirely white demographic, primarily, but in any event. It's a good question. I mean, my approach to that has evolved over time, and I could get into the nitty gritty of the trajectory, but broadly speaking, I've just become more comfortable with being uncomfortable, and with the idea of making people uncomfortable and sitting with that as its own particular form of discomfort and just leaning into it. And okay, you don't want me here. You're going to yell at me. That's fine. Very rarely do I feel physically threatened. It's happened a few times, and there's de escalation strategies, and ultimately, places like I can just leave, right? So I'm very aware of my surroundings when I attend these events. Yeah. My cameraman and I just go in with our iPhones, and I'm inspired a bit by kind of wrestling culture. So the approach that I take, I try to be fly on the wall, but to the extent that I'm recognized as a character, because I go to a lot of these things. There are other characters as well, and nothing is staged, but that's kind of the mentality that I approach, and I find that again that helps de-escalate situations.
Well, let's get into Queen Romana. I'm using air quotes for Queen. How did you learn of her? Like, she must have come on your radar quite a bit over the pandemic as you're looking into these things.
Yeah, I mean, so she obviously emerges in the sovereign citizen kind of sphere of things when I started hearing about notices of liability and these proclamations and things of that sort. Her name came up. I can't say that I have followed diligently with what she's up to. It's a little bit out there, even for me.
That's a good way to put it.
But I spent the entire month of the duration of the convoy / occupation of Ottawa. And she came and was a speaker on at least 2 occasions. And those moments stand out to me as some of the eeriest, most unsettling parts of the convoy. And so since then, I've kind of, I'll keep an eye on what she's up to. And when I heard that this was happening in Peterborough, the intention to arrest the entire police force, I wasn't sure that she would actually attend, knowing that she had been out east, but thought it would be interesting to see her group in action.
And you just decided you're just going to make the trip over to, film it for your, like, what was your plan? Was it going to be,
I have an affinity for Peterborough, in part because there was this burger joint, Peter Burgers, that evolved into kind of a merchandise shop / extremist recruiting ground, holdfast.
Okay.
Yeah, this is a whole other episode, let me tell you.
Yeah.
But in like a 10-second summary, they objected to public health orders, and so had a sit-in in their restaurant, and then kind of ascended to this level of popularity in the freedom movement. And I had beef with them, so to speak, because one of the owners kind of chased me off the property one time when I was there covering a Chris Sky rally, and then followed me into a restaurant in another city to like have a back and forth, and they were just antagonistic. So like I said, wrestling characters, part of what I did was document them and put a focus on them, and most recently their restaurant closed. So I didn't go for the last day, because they didn't end up doing it on schedule. So I was like, okay, I'll kill 2 birds with 1 stone, and I'll visit Peter Burgers for my final little goodbye, and then go see what they're doing at the police station.
Interesting. Well, let's get into the Peterborough Siege. So you get there, my understanding from your videos, it's you and one other person, like a camera person?
Yes.
Okay. So as you arrive there, you're probably unsure what to expect. What do you kind of come into? What's going on when you show up on the scene?
Um, so initially there was nobody there because we got there pretty early. So just kind of roaming around Confederation Square. There was one truck with like, flags and an F Trudeau and whatever, and it's driving around. And then eventually it stops and the people get out and they approach me. So that they, I guess, were familiar on some level, but didn't really understand, what I do and why I was there. And so we were talking, and they came from out of town, and weren't actually super familiar. The man wasn't super familiar with Romana, but the woman was. So, initially we'd started off kind of having a reasonable conversation. And then it got a bit dicey when she's like, yeah, but, taxes aren't real. And, the Senate said it. And so that was, as we were having this conversation, my cameraman called me because there was an RV that showed up. And
Okay.
so like we realized that the Queen was going to be there. And then, people started coming in. There were some Peterborough / Holdfast fans who immediately recognized me. So there was a little bit of tension there, and they're like, "Go away," and I'm like, "No, I'm staying here. This is a public area." And then the counter protester showed up.
Mm.
So this is, the guy in the orange mask. He had a sign that said "Vaccines save lives," which lasted for about 5 minutes before someone came and ripped it, and like he took a lot of heat
Oh, yeah.
throughout the afternoon, and then ended up using his voice more than anything else,
Mm.
and was completely restrained in his own actions, which I imagine is very difficult.
Leave me alone. Hey. Get out. Hey. Please. Get out. Vaccines save lives. Vaccines save lives. Assault me again, you fucks. Vaccines save lives. Hail Satan.
But then, Frank makes his announcement. Okay, we're going to march over to the police station. Everyone be peaceful, plan to be peaceful, and, follow the rules of the road as we go there, be safe, and I'll go in and do the talking. And so then this group, starts marching towards the police, which is like a block away, a block and a half away. And they congregate, and at this point there's maybe, oh gosh, 40, 60 people, which is a lot of people, right? That's a lot of people. Some of them I later learned, weren't there for the Queen, but also were morbidly curious,
Mm-hmm.
to see what was going to happen. So eventually the crowd thins out. But Frank, again, he makes his second announcement. I'm going to go in. This is going to be peaceful. And then we're going to call the military after they're all arrested, and they're going to come and take them away. And he goes into the vestibule, and the door is locked. And so he knocks on the door, and nobody comes. And then they start sort of brainstorming out loud. One person's like, well, what if we punch that guy, being the counter protester? Then they'll come out. And someone else is like, well, does anyone know how to pick a lock? And then they're like, well, why don't we just call 911?
Oh my God. So that's spitballing ideas. I guess if you're gonna take over a police station, there's no real playbook, I guess, to go by.
No, they certainly did not have a playbook. Anyway, Frank decides, let's call 911. That's a good idea. And the call doesn't go anywhere, obviously. And for a while, like I would say at least an hour, maybe more, they're kind of waiting outside the police station, just milling about, like periodically knocking. He takes his megaphone, like, let us in, we need to arrest you. And then the Queen's RV pulls up to the front of the police station. So she had been there earlier. She hadn't emerged. I originally thought that maybe she was going to make a speech or go on top of the RV, or I don't know, not knowing her that well. And she didn't come out. So when they pulled up in front of the police station, same deal, where for maybe, she's elusive for like 45 minutes. Then they bring her out briefly, and I guess she was doing a live stream. She starts handing out snacks, like cut up vegetables that she cut up herself, she says, tins of sardines, like just tins of no-name sardines, and water bottles. And I later learned that from someone like a Peterborough resident who was just interested, and we sort of follow each other on Twitter, and also he was part of Holdfast stuff. Was there briefly and took a water bottle, and they were unsealed. So she's handing out unsealed water bottles, bizarre stuff. And I guess after snack time, Frank realizes that, hold on, there's other entrances and exits to this building. So let's go explore that possibility. He tried performing a citizen's arrest on 2 people in a truck, which didn't succeed. And then they mosey into a restricted area of the police station. And so this is where I'm like, okay, things are, not going to necessarily end well for anyone. And
this restricted area, because I've only seen it through like the videos and stuff that you posted. Is it kind of like almost like a gated area where maybe the police would park their vehicles or something? Like, what was this area?
So it's not gated, right? Like nobody climbed any fences or anything like that, as far as I'm aware. But it's sort of like the police station is situated kind of on a corner. Then there's, the front entrance, and then sort of it slopes down, and there's cruisers parked there. It's probably like the loading dock for, if they have someone in custody. There's like side entrances, and then kind of just around the building, and then there's another side. So apparently when they have their bike auctions, parts of this restricted area are unrestricted. So it's not entirely sort of sensitive, but nonetheless, there are signs.
Either way, it's a statement to like take a crowd of people down there banging on the employee entrance of a police station.
Yes. So, Frank talks to the door. Frank kind of wanders around, and then eventually, and so this part I'm saying secondhand because I didn't see this. I came when I heard the screaming, but there's a vehicle, and Frank like either tries to open the door or someone opens the door and tries to like pull the guy out who wasn't in uniform but was presumably on his way in or out of the station. And like things do not go well, right? So immediately Frank is taken down. There's an officer on his back. The guy recording it is like, stand down, but he's talking to the cops, trying to say like, no, you can't arrest us, we're arresting you. Which again, the police were not receptive to. And then where the corner, I was sitting and smoking a joint actually on the front of the police station, and so this lady runs up and she's like, Frank needs your help, to everyone who was there. And I was like, okay, this is gonna be good. So I scoot, because I take an electric scooter to these. That's actually, I didn't mention that, but that's part of my getaway safety plan, usually, and go to the back, where now there's madness and chaos. So this one lady, this stands out to me. She's sitting on the ground, wailing, like screaming, like, horrific. I thought she was being murdered. Upon reviewing the videos, like literally it's just, her wrist is being held. Like it was totally, she was like a crisis actor almost. And she came from Romana's van. So I'm kind of curious about her situation. But anyway, this is where the arrests take place, and then the crowd eventually sort of gets moved back onto the sidewalk, the public sidewalk. And then they waited on the other side of the police station for quite some time. And so the van, like the RV, eventually turns the corner, is now sitting there. I wasn't watching her live streams as this was happening. So I later learned that, she's supposedly in touch with the US military, and then the spaceship has come, and, this and that. Did not see her emerge from the van again. So she stayed inside the rest of the time. Funny enough, some of the local area residents who were just watching this happen happen to be former colleagues of Frank's.
Yeah, I saw what I think it was you who posted the video where it's two fellas sitting on like a front step, like watching it all go down, and because a part of Frank Curtin's kind of narrative or the mythology behind all this is that the company that he worked for, he claims got a contract to make the bottles that hand sanitizer would go in, and this company got the contract before COVID was discovered. Hence, it's a big pandemic. Frank makes no secret that he left the job as a result of all of this. But you talked to some ex-employees or ex-coworkers. What did they say about all this?
They said it was bunk. That yes, they made containers, but they weren't like specifically designated for sanitizer. And in any event, basically they disputed what he was saying.
Do you know what kind of company it was? Was it like a plastic manufacturing company or something?
That's what I understood it to be. Yeah, like some sort of manufacturing of actual physical products.
Okay.
So these gentlemen have been watching the show from across the street, and the police station is right here. You can see Romana's RV.
Yeah, it was a joke.
Why hasn't the Queen come out and stepped in and made a proclamation of everybody's innocence? Where is the Queen? What happened to her security as soon as the shit went down? They disappeared like snowflakes on a summer fucking day. What a joke. And the whole thing's a joke.
The main guy who got arrested actually classified our boss as a pedophile.
Called him a pedophile, our boss. I hope he sues his ass off right now. Stupid. This is just stupid now. It's gone beyond whatever this is.
He belongs to so many charities in town. Nuts. It's been a joke all day. Yeah, what he was saying about the bottles, they're just bottles that we made. That was it. They may have had to do with COVID, may not have. God only knows.
People walking by, like how were people reacting to this?
There wasn't a ton of foot traffic, but the area, kind of the neighbors, were obviously not obviously, but they seemed intrigued / disgusted / confused. So kind of what is going on? I don't think that anyone necessarily knew or expected this to happen. Mm-hmm. In Peterborough, it's no secret that there are these groups operating. So I think that's part of the landscape, but I don't think, at least the people I spoke with, were anticipating this specific event.
Yeah, and how weird it is. Like, you walking by, you would never get... So there's this lady who thinks she's the Queen. Like, it would be... I would walk by this and think like, oh my God, it's weird that there's an anti-mask protest happening right now.
Right. This is so much more than that. Absolutely. Yeah. It was neat as well, because as I was sort of live tweeting what was going on, people from Peterborough kind of stopped by to say hi on occasion. So I got to meet some pretty cool people, which, helped the time pass, because after the arrests, not a whole lot went down. Mm-hmm. It was just sitting around, then waiting to see what the Queen would do, which ended up being nothing.
So did she just eventually just drive off in the RV?
Yeah. So at some point in the evening, she turns on the RV, and then we go to our scooters and we follow it. Not being so familiar with Peterborough, but, knowing enough to see a giant vehicle and go in the same direction, which we did. And so the first time it went around in a complete circle. And then the second time, same sort of direction, and then pulls into an empty parking lot where, it sat for a little bit and then pulls out, and then another circle, and then starts driving like it's going to the highway, right? So we're following it along these roads, probably really irritating to the driver now that I think about it, to see these scooters just pop up out of nowhere. And I was in a purple shirt the entire time. So, in retrospect, it's kind of funny. And then, after another sort of going down the main, another giant, we're not going in anywhere. my scooter battery was low, and I had a Twitter Spaces to do. So that was the end of the pursuit. And I don't know where they went after that, but certainly she didn't come offer any tangible assistance or support to the people who got arrested.
That was, I mean, congratulations to the paparazzi, by the way, last Saturday. I mean, you were just right there from the minute you saw the RV, you know, the scooter, you're just following us and you were right there. I don't think there was a moment when you were not there, you know, with your camera in front of my face and or other team members.
You were there from the point that it starts up until the bitter end. In total, how long did this whole thing play out?
I would say the people gathered at around, 12:30 noon, 1 o'clock, give or take. And then by the time we left, it was about 8:30, or not by the time she was gone out of my sight, it was 8:30 p.m.
Mm-hmm. And as far as the protesters or whatever we want to call them, when she left, did everyone else disperse as well, or were there still some kind of stragglers after she leaves?
I'm not really sure, because I was following her and I didn't go back to check the police station, but there were still probably 15, 30 people who were still there when she left, kind of with no direction or idea what was happening.
Wow. And could you sense like a change in tone or a change in mood? Like when Frank and the others are arrested, the Queen and her staff isn't leaving the RV. The people that are sitting on the, the steps or out front of the police station, like they must have felt pretty alone. Could you get a sense of, how they were reacting to how poorly this played out for them?
Well, there was less confidence than they had in the morning. You can say that. It was, I would say, it was directed towards police. Kind of those heavy negative emotions were directed towards police. And kind of, she has the military on the phone. No, it's true, and we're trying to believe or actually believing, I'm not sure. But it wasn't as dramatic a change as I would have expected, having been abandoned by your dear leader.
Mm-hmm. And now getting back to earlier in the day, you talked about Frank Curtin making the one or two speeches leading up to the siege. Was he like kind of coming across as the leader? Like were people kind of rallying around him during this period?
Yeah, he was absolutely sort of the one in charge. And kind of the point person as well between the crowd and Romana. There were a couple of others who seemed, prominent or involved in this, but he was the one with the megaphone, and he was the one leading the charge.
Wow. And as far as the mood, so there's the first kind of thing in the park where he talks to everybody and then they walk over to the police station together. Was it as tense as I'm imagining that? Like, did you feel like, oh my God, like they're going to start smashing windows? Like, was it that kind of mood, or how did it feel during that period of time leading up to the police
I wouldn't
station?
say it was the smash windows vibe. I've been in situations where that is the sense, and it didn't feel quite like that. I think that they thought Frank was going to go in and say what he needed to say, and it was going to happen. And I had a conversation with Frank before going in, like, okay, what do you anticipate, and how are you going to get through? He's like, oh, the doors will be open. They'll open the doors for me. Like there was no real contingency plans. They thought it was going to work the way they wanted it to.
Wow. And at any point, did the police kind of talk to the crowd, like come out and say, listen, everybody, like this has gone too far?
There was zero police presence, zero. None in the park, none in front of the station, no barricades, no nothing.
That kind of surprises me with a crowd of that many people. But I guess if I was with the police force, I'd be thinking like, do we want to agitate this? So they're in a tough position, certainly.
I'm sure that that's the tactical kind of choice, right? Because if we show up, then, you know, who's the unlucky sucker who has to be the one standing outside and dealing with them? Isn't it better if we just go inside and maybe, you know, we hunker down and they'll just go away on their own?
Mm-hmm. And we kind of get a glimpse of how they would react to police in the video you posted, where I think your tweet was something like, this is about as close as they come to making an arrest, but it turns out they weren't cops or something. But anyway, it's like a truck driving, and Frank and a few others approach the truck, and they're looking in the windows and trying to figure out if it's police officers in the truck. And I think one of them even makes a statement that kind of comes across as about something to do with hanging them or something. Like, it's a pretty intense kind of moment. So I guess that gives a sense of, if a couple police officers in uniform stepped out of the station, you know, what kind of thing
there
could have played
were
out.
a few among the group who were more inclined to violence than the others.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of them were just sort of standing around like sheep in a field, you know, oh, look, this is happening, like but like passive. And then a small group of them were aggressive. So, you know, that was when the counter protester initially arrived. That was, you know, when you sensed it the most, and he was at the police station briefly as well. So you know, when I say that they weren't going to go break the windows, I still don't think those guys would have broken the windows. But if they had, you know, people to fight with, they might have. And yet, mysteriously, none of them really tangled with police, as far as I can tell.
Well, I don't think they had a lot of choice. You talked about, you've mentioned a few times, like wrestling culture, and I see the WWE logo in behind you. The police officers that are filmed arresting Frank, they look like, you know, like professional wrestlers. I don't think the people in that crowd that I saw, all of them holding a phone in front of them, for their faces, pointing and screaming at the police. I don't think there was anyone there that was really in a position to arrest any police officers who didn't want to go willingly.
No, I agree with that assessment. They had neither the stamina nor the sort of physical health. There was a lot of older people there. It wouldn't have gone well to try and physically fight the cops.
Yeah. You know, I know you spend a lot of time researching and covering and investigating kind of these extremist groups. A lot of them are anti-government. I think one thing these groups seem to all have in common is that they generally find a home on the internet, and that's where they kind of, you know, form their groups and plan these events. In your videos, one thing that I found really striking was it seems like every time the We the People or Ramona's People are filmed, every one of them is filming each other. Like, they all have phones. Was that just because you're filming the key moments, or was the whole time you were there, everyone was filming?
There were like people who were recording here and there. You know, there was downtime where nothing, like literally nothing was happening. But you know, the moment someone's like, oh, I'm going to go back to the vestibule and knock, you know, there's people recording that.
Yeah. I noticed that happens certainly here in Peterborough, but anytime I see events like this, it seems everyone's on their phones. And I wonder if it's a way that they can kind of bring their strange online place into the real world. If they all have their phones out, they're streaming, they're on Telegram as this is happening, it maybe kind of suspends or allows kind of this illogical thing to play out.
It suspends reality in a way, because they feel that there's this barrier between themselves and what's actually happening, but that they are doing something significant in capturing it. And I mean, to be fair, I'm out there doing the same thing, just in a different way, right?
Yeah, on the other side. Kind of like you've probably, I'm sure everyone has heard like a war photographer describe how they look through their camera and, you know, they're no longer there. They're just capturing this moment. It's kind of like this twisted, weird version of that, where if I'm filming it and I'm live streaming it to my bizarre kind of group on Telegram, you know, on the back pages of the internet kind of thing, you know, this isn't actually happening. I just wonder how, like, when we talk about this event at the Peterborough police station, it's so easy to roll your eyes at and think like how insane this is. But at the same time, the fact remains there's like 30, 40, 50 people there who firmly believe the American government or military or whoever is on their way. Somehow it involves aliens. The Queen is in a van out front of the police station. Not to mention the fact why an international military would be interested in the arrest of a couple police in, Peterborough, Ontario. That's a whole separate thing. But just the fact that there are these people like Frank Curtin that find each other on the internet and they're so committed to this, that these kinds of things can happen. And I just don't think like a police station or police force or society, like how does it deal with these kind of groups? If you follow a lot of Frank Curtin's videos and the things he's done, every single person he encounters, you can hear him explain his belief and them just be completely speechless at like, what? Like nobody knows how to take him. And I wonder if that's why this was able to go as far as it was. And it very well could have turned out differently.
For sure. For sure it could have turned out differently. It could have been potentially fatal. Thankfully it wasn't. I don't think we're equipped to know how to deal with this. And, you can't really combat it with logic, right? You can't use facts because you fundamentally disagree on what's valid and real and what isn't. And so there's no meeting of the minds there. And then if you don't share the same objective reality, how do you dialogue that, right? So, it's relatively easy for me to go in and spend a little bit of time there and, have these conversations. But the people who they encounter in their day-to-day lives, like that's, friends, family, the grocery store clerk, whatever, we're just not equipped to deal with it. And we need to be, because this is an increasing segment of society, in varying degrees, right?
Well, it doesn't take, as evidenced by this, it doesn't take many people to show up at a police station and try to overthrow it. Was there any moments at all during all of this where somebody seemed to question what was happening? Or was everybody, other than the counter-protester, or was everybody generally appearing to be on the same page that, this is going down today?
I would say that a lot of people were in the same book, not necessarily on the same page. So there were devotees, who believed this. There were some who were skeptical about maybe Romana, but in agreement with the idea that, the police deserve to be arrested. Then there was others who I'd say are part of the broader freedom movement, but we're there because this is a curiosity and we share some things with these guys, but what the heck's going on? So it was, a varying sort of degrees of belief.
Okay. Now, for people who are hearing our talk and learning about what you're doing for the first time, how do they find you and follow your, exploits in these other, events like this in the future?
Yeah, I'm most active on Twitter. So my handle is Caryma Rules, CarymaRules. I also, you just Google S'ad Lawyer Toronto, you'll find me.
S'ad Lawyer Toronto. But S'ad, is that your last name?
It is my last name. My last name has the apostrophe.
You're not a sad lawyer, because you seem very happy.
It depends. It depends on the day.
All right. Well, Caryma, I appreciate you sharing this bizarre experience with me. It gives a bit more context to your videos and what I've seen from watching this play out online from Nova Scotia. So I appreciate that.
Thanks for having me.
I want to thank you for joining Caryma and I for our discussion surrounding the Peterborough Police Siege. If you aren't familiar with Caryma's work, go find her on Twitter. The footage she shot of the siege is a real trip. And with that, I'm going to put a bow on this episode of Nighttime, but before we part, I have some thanks. First, a big thanks to Caryma for sharing her experiences with me and with you, the listeners of Nighttime. A shout out to Monty Datta, who contributes the music to this episode, And lastly, but most importantly, a massive thank you to everyone who listens to Nighttime, as without your interest and your support, this show would be as pointless as it would be impossible. But with that said, keeping the show alive is and has always been an uphill battle. So if you want to help take a bit of weight off the show's back, make sure you're listening on the premium feed. And not only does the premium feed fund the creation of the show, it'll give you more of each topic than you'll find here on the free feed, as I'm adding exclusive content regularly and maintain a full back catalog of past episodes only on the premium feed. So for about the price of a cup of coffee, subscribe to the premium feed at patreon.com/nighttimepodcast. And with that said, let me thank the newest subscribers, Matt, Heather, and Kaylin. Thank you for your generous support. And for anyone else who'd like to support the show but can't do it financially, a great way to help out the show is by sharing this episode on social media and letting some like-minded friends know what we're doing here. If you have any story ideas, if you want to give feedback on the show, or if you'd like to contribute a voice memo to be aired and responded to in an upcoming episode, you can do all that and more at nighttimepodcast.com. I hope to hear from you. But until then, take care of each other, hug your loved ones tight, and let me know if you see anything weird.
The Nighttime Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Jordan Bonaparte.